So Jay, I know that when you meet with clients, really all of us as advisors have a lot of conversations about risk. It's a really big part of doing a successful life plan. So let's start at the very beginning. Let's define what we're talking about when we talk about risks to your financial life plan.
Yeah, the main risks that exist in a financial plan are identifying the possibilities and the probabilities of loss. So, loss of life, loss of job, loss of income, loss of investment capital. Those are the main things we're talking about.
So if we're looking at really a lot of different ways that loss could impact our probability of success, what are some of those steps we can take to mitigate some of that risk?
Yeah, typically taking the time to define the risk, whether that is understanding how much income you would need to replace loss of a job in order to take care of your family if you were to suffer some untimely demise, or how much risk to take in the portfolio, stock to bond ratio, certain sectors, things like that. The things that would cause a lot of discomfort or pain in the portfolio or the overall financial plan, how do we mitigate those things?
Yeah, almost like a personal audit. These
Correct.
are all the areas I may have some vulnerability. And then let's give some suggestions. If somebody is just starting out on their financial plan, and we're going to say these are some common risks we see and steps you can take today, what would you suggest to somebody in that position?
Absolutely. Through that evaluation, you should typically come across three main areas of risk that you want to mitigate. One is cash management. How do you prepare for most 80 to 90% of emergencies by having 3 to 6 months worth of expenses off to the side? That's a typical rule of thumb.
Yeah.
And having that fully liquid in cash, high yield savings account available to you to access at any time, so you don't have to take on high interest debt or liquidate some of your portfolio to cover those costs. The second one would be insurance, whether that's life insurance, disability, or the other. You're offloading a risk to a company for a fee. And how can you mitigate those in a way that makes the most sense financially without being insurance poor either?
Right.
The last one would be portfolio risk. How do we make sure you're appropriately diversified? How do you make sure you have the appropriate stock to bond mix? And make sure that you're not taking on too much risk so that if the portfolio goes through some sort of short-term volatility, it doesn't cause you to lose sleep at night.
Well, and I think that's a really good point that we're looking at lots of different ways that risk can come our way. And we know that life changes, which means your risk can change. So really this practice is ongoing.
Absolutely, yeah. A financial plan is a living, breathing document.
Yeah.
It's an exercise, an illustration of everything in orbit around your financial situation. And that should be reviewed constantly, but this risk audit should happen at least every 3 to 5 years as your life changes. Marriage, kids, property purchase, business ownership, all those things that evolve throughout our lives, the risk can change as well.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And you and I both know this is just the beginning of a conversation on
Absolutely.
risk. So the encouragement to any of our viewers is that if you've got a new idea about risk now from some of these things Jay and I have talked about, bring them up with your McKinley Carter advisor. Do your own personal risk audit. Examine where you may feel vulnerable. There's lots of ways to work on protecting yourself and your financial life plan from risk.